There was a moment when the electric guitar stopped sounding the way people expected it to. The instrument was familiar, but suddenly it seemed capable of speaking a completely different language. At the center of that transformation was a young guitarist who approached music less like a rulebook and more like an experiment. His name was Eddie Van Halen. But what made Eddie different? Was it simply speed, technique, and a remarkable ear? Or was there something deeper behind the sound that changed generations of guitar players? To understand Eddie Van Halen, you have to go back before the fame, before the legendary performances, and before the guitar became almost inseparable from his identity. Eddie and his brother Alex grew up surrounded by music after their family moved from the Netherlands to California. Eddie eventually became deeply connected to the guitar, developing his skills through constant experimentation. He was not interested in simply reproducing what other musicians had already done. He wanted to discover what the instrument could become. That curiosity became especially important during the early years of Van Halen. Alongside Alex Van Halen, David Lee Roth, and Michael Anthony, Eddie helped create a sound that immediately felt different. The band's early recordings combined energy, melody, rhythm, and guitar technique in a way that reached far beyond traditional expectations. But that wasn't the full story. One of Eddie's greatest strengths was his ability to make advanced guitar playing feel musical. His famous tapping technique became one of his signatures, but the technique itself was never the entire point. What mattered was how he used it. Instead of treating difficult guitar passages as demonstrations, Eddie turned them into memorable musical moments. His approach also extended beyond his hands. Eddie experimented with guitars, pickups, amplifiers, electronics, and setups, constantly searching for combinations that matched the sound he imagined. His famous striped instruments became part of rock culture, but behind the visual identity was something more important: an obsession with creating a personal sound. Then came the release of Van Halen's debut album in 1978. The impact was immediate. Eddie's playing introduced millions of listeners to a new possibility for the electric guitar. Suddenly, young musicians around the world were listening differently. Guitar practice was no longer only about learning established techniques. It became about asking what else might be possible. What happened next changed the role of the rock guitarist. Eddie continued evolving throughout his career, moving between explosive guitar passages, delicate melodies, rhythmic ideas, and innovative studio techniques. He could make a complicated part sound effortless, but the simplicity listeners heard was often the result of years of experimentation. Few people noticed how important that philosophy would become. Eddie's influence eventually reached far beyond Van Halen. Generations of guitarists studied his techniques, copied his equipment choices, and tried to understand the musical thinking behind his playing. Yet perhaps his greatest contribution was not a specific technique or piece of equipment. It was permission. Eddie showed musicians that they did not have to choose between technical ability and creativity. They could learn the rules, understand the instrument, and then create their own language. That is why his legacy remains so powerful. Eddie Van Halen did not simply change how the guitar could be played. He changed how guitarists imagined what they could become. And perhaps that is the most lasting part of his story. The greatest innovations do not remain attached to one person forever. They become ideas that continue moving from one generation to the next. Eddie's guitar may have been uniquely his, but the curiosity behind it belongs to anyone willing to ask one simple question. What if the instrument could do something nobody had imagined yet?